Ladies and gents, hello. Today we're going to be looking at the first certificate story writing task. So go and grab your creative hats and let's get to it. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so the objectives for a story are quite simple. And the first thing you're going to have to think about is your arc. Okay, every story should follow an arc. That means it should be an introduction followed by a tension, something that is challenging for the protagonist, and then a resolution. You don't have that many words to play with here, so it's not going to be a Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings style story. There's going to be an introduction to a main character, something's going to happen, and then there'll be a resolution, good or bad, depending on your temperament, of course. And super important, this exercise is designed to test your ability using past tenses. So if, like a lot of people, you start writing your story in present tense, you're automatically going to lose points. Make sure you write in the past tense consistently while you're doing this task. That is what they want to see, so make sure you give the examiner what they want. We're going to be looking at some specific language later on, but now we're going to look at another technical point that should help you. So something you're going to have to think about when you're doing this task is your ability to transition your story. Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about the arc and using the correct tenses, but a big challenge that people have is making transitions emotionally and in terms of location throughout the course of their story. As I said, it was a pretty short story that you're going to have to write. So if we check at the emotional transitions here, happy to worried to relieved, okay? It's a short story, so we don't have to go through 1,000,001 emotions. We simply go from a happy introduction to a worried center of the story to a relieved conclusion. That will correspond with your character moving from different locations, possibly. You could always do a story in one location, quite often it will change. So, as it corresponds, happy would be at home. Later on, you've got worried. I'd put, for example, a forest. Maybe your character gets lost in a forest. Then relieved when they find themselves in a town. Okay. So, keeping this in mind, this will help you with your structure and, of course, your vocabulary, because you're going to need adjectives to communicate how your character is feeling and where they are. So, this is another important point to consider, guys. So, remember, think about your story arc. You don't just want a story where a guy goes to the shop, buys some bread, and then has a sandwich, and that's the end of the story. There has to be some kind of tension. Do that by thinking about your transitions and then building your vocabulary on top of it, as we will do in a moment. All right, as always with a written activity, we're going to look at the mark scheme. So remember, you've got content, communicative achievement, structure, and language. They're going to be marked out of 5. With a grand total of 20 per task, all right? So really important that we maximize the amount of points that we can get from each section. Now, I'm going to just use a very quick example from this book, which is First for Schools Trainer. And if I read you a story question, we'll have a look and see how we can apply this mark scheme to it, all right? So the question is, the school where you study English has asked students to write short stories for an English language competition. The short story must begin with the words, "When Chris woke up, he expected the day to be like any other one." Your story must include a famous person and an invitation. All right. So immediately we know how we're going to get the maximum points for content. It has to be a story. So don't write a report if it's asking you for a story, okay? The short story must begin with the words, "When Chris woke up, he expected the day to be like any other one." Don't change this. If they say start with these words, start with these words, okay? So that's super important. The story must include a famous person and an invitation. If you don't include these things, you lose points. So make sure you include anything that they tell you to, all right? So that's the content. Answer the question. Later on, you've got communicative achievement. Now, this is what I said before, okay? I used the example of somebody writing a story about a guy who goes to a shop to buy some bread, and the story finishes with him making a sandwich. All right, so I believe it or not, I have read stories like this, The objective of a story is to engage the reader and hold the reader's attention. Even if it's only a very short story, it's supposed to be a little bit interesting at least, okay? So, to get your point across, to make your reader engaged and invested in the story, you're going to have to use a variety of language. You're going to have to tell a story arc with a tension and a resolution at the end. That will affect your communicative achievement. Okay, and how clearly you can do it. If you're off talking about irrelevant things, or if you start telling two stories at the same time and everything gets lost, that will affect your communicative achievement. Your structure, okay, again, think about the arc, the beginning, the middle, of the end, and the logical flow between the beginning, how your character feels, the transitions into the middle, and the transitions to the end. Have you followed the arc? Are the transitions logical and clearly communicated? Connecting words, all this type of thing. And finally, the language, which I'm going to look at in a little bit more detail in a second. Of course, you can probably guess, as I said before, past tenses, and we're going to look at that, specifically narrative tenses, in just a second. So stay tuned. Okay, so let's check the grammar that will help you to achieve a good mark in this B2 First Certificate level written task. Okay, so the first thing with a story is that they really want to see that you can use narrative tenses. And narrative tenses are actually three structures combined into one: past simple, past continuous, past perfect. And the way you link these and use them fluently will affect your mark greatly. This is the most important grammar point that you can study for story writing, okay? Now, the past continuous and the past simple, I noticed that a lot of my students don't have that much of a problem using them, but they don't use the past perfect. And one little piece of advice I would give you for this is to ask yourself, why, okay? For example, if you are writing a sentence and the sentence is something like, Mark bought a sandwich. Ask yourself, why did he buy the sandwich? Then use a past perfect to answer it. For example, Mark bought a sandwich because he hadn't eaten breakfast. All right, so then you have combined two of the narrative tenses. You could say, Robert felt sad. Again, ask yourself why. Robert felt sad because he hadn't seen his family in a long period of time. Something like this, okay? So by asking why, you can actually start implementing the past perfect. Then you can combine them all together. Robert was driving when he stopped to buy a sandwich because he hadn't eaten breakfast. Okay, so you're using past continuous for a context, past simple for an event, and a past perfect for a reason. All right, so if you're struggling, try to think along those lines and be as creative as you can. But don't worry, it's just a question of practice, really. Other structures that you might wish to consider are ability in the past, okay? This could be a grammar lesson by itself. I haven't really got time to do that today, but remember that instead of just saying could in the past, especially for single affirmative actions, you're going to need to use be able to, manage to, or succeed in plus gerund, okay? So make sure that you vary these a little bit and don't just say that he could do something, he could do something. There is a little grammar trick in there as well. I might do a class on that at a later date, but if you are okay with your grammar, you feel comfortable using these structures, make sure that you don't just say could all the time, and make sure that you vary your structures. They will expect to see that at B2 level. You've also got relative clauses. Super important, again, as always, guys, in all of your writing activities, but especially in a story. So relative clauses like who, that, which, when, where. This will give you the ability to expand your sentences and give more information about the things you're talking about. It's a story. The examiner wants to hear more information about the things that are in your story. It's vital if it's not going to be just like a flat piece of paper. So make sure you use these and your story will seem much more developed. Reported speech. There might be a dialogue in your story, so make sure that you use reported speech. Also use different reporting verbs: whispered, shouted, yelled, okay? Anything like that that can transmit a little bit more emotion. Instead of just saying he said, she said, they said, try to expand using some other reporting verbs, and you'll find that your mark goes up substantially. And finally, I've thrown this one in here just in case. It's another way to use the past perfect, and you could use a third conditional. Okay, any conditionals will do. I always try to suggest you use 5 or 6 grammar points in a writing that will make you gain as many points as possible. So a third conditional, why not? It's in the past, so it fits the third conditional profile, and then you can get some more points, all right? So to sum up what we've looked at today, think about your arc, your transitions, okay? It is a creative piece, but there does need to be a structure. It's not just putting ideas directly onto the page. There has to be some kind of structure to it. And focus a lot on your tenses here, the narrative tenses. Absolutely vital that they are on point. If you don't have those mastered, practice, 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 because you will lose a lot of points if you cannot use those correctly in the story. Additionally, think about your adjectives, your ability to describe things, and these other grammatical points that I've put on the board, and you should be able to achieve a decent mark. So thank you very much for tuning in, as always, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me on here, on YouTube, or via the website. As always, I wish you a very, very good luck with your exams and your future studies, and we'll stay in touch and speak again soon. Thanks, guys.